What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Keeping Karlsson. I'm Jeremy Versillo. Joining me tonight, my pal and yours, Shams Venamore. Shams, how are you doing this fine Tuesday evening?
Doing well. Used up basically every single one of my moves unexpectedly. Every time you're like, oh, this move makes sense, this move makes sense. And then you're like, oh, wait, I have none left. So let's hope that Caden Gooley does something with his three moves, because I guess Matthew Joseph was going to do anything with his last one for me.
Sometimes all there's to do is just sit and watch. And we have a bit of an opportunity for you, dear listener. If you would like to make moves like Shams has been, we are calling for people to join the Ukko-Pekka waitlist. The Ukko-Pekka is the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. It is the league for patrons of Keeping Karlsson. For $5 a month, you can become a patron, or if you already are a patron, shoot us a comment in the chat or a message if you want to sign up for the waitlist. I believe you can also do it through the website. We're running low on people to take over teams and would like to fill those spots with active managers if anybody else needs to drop out. And with that, let's roll straight into the news. There's two big pieces of news this afternoon, Shams. Which one do you think is the bigger one?
I think it's with the soapbox that I've been living on. I'm going to go with the Kane one. Is that Kane has been officially signed by the Detroit Red Wings, and you can now be okay with actually having him on your roster. And then the best part of it all right now is you can actually put him in your IR spot, because the second it was announced, I believe he got the O tag. So if you have an IR slot on Yahoo, you can fit him in there, and you should work on doing that, because the report is that he's unlikely to do any play today or this week. So even though he's signed, it's not like he's going to be put into a position to play. And also keep in mind is that we're talking about a pretty significant injury. So just the fact that he's signed doesn't mean that he's just going to be running off to the races. And then also we don't know what actual lineups are going to be in play. So I think this is one of those situations about how desperate you are for a potential point getter, but you already have him. You know, if you ignored my messaging and actually have him on your team already, might as well put him in the IR spot and wait and see. But, you know, depends on how much, if you want to gamble, if you're going to be one of those people to use up one of your moves that I've already used up on other players that are actually playing the game.
I do want to temper some expectations with Patrick Kane here. We all know he's a future Hall of Famer, a great player, but he is 34 years old and just had a surgery with a 0% return to elite performance rate. Here's a summary from Cam Robinson on Twitter of other NHL players who have had this hip resurfacing surgery. Nicklas Backstrom played 47 games and had 22 points after the surgery and just recently stepped away from the game for another time. Carl Hagelin did not play a single game. Ryan Kessler did not play a single game. Ed Jovanowski played 37 games and had 5 points. I think Backstrom is the closest talent comparable to Kane, and Kane's even a bit better than that. But if you're expecting 80 to 90 point Patrick Kane from 2 years ago to show back up, I would hold your horses a bit. It's possible, but not likely. That being said, like Shams said, he's worth holding in your IR slot. That has value. And it looks like he could play games as early as next week, according to the coach. Although there's no hard timeline, it sounds like he's going to join the team, immediately start practicing, and we'll hear more news coming up.
And another thing to keep in mind, too, is that this contract is like a $2.5 million deal for like 1 year, which is the remainder of this year. So I'm just kind of hesitant. I know a lot of people want to say, oh, he played with the Brinkhead, or oh, he was great in the past. And the thing is, got to remember is that the Red Wings kind of like to use their forwards almost like a Seattle, where it's just a swath of guys on all three lines. So it's no guarantee that you're not going to be, you know, it might end up as a Larkin to Brinkhead Kane. Like, that is one of the possibility scopes, but he could be on the third line with like Fabry and Sprague as well. So just to keep in mind that the expectations should be tempered and the scope could be wide of possibilities here.
That's a good point. I know Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat were really close in Chicago and actively wanted to play together again, but there's no guarantee that happens to start off, nor that it sticks for more than a game or two, especially if Kane is struggling to keep up. With that, we'll move into the second piece of news of the day, kind of a weird one that we're not going to go too deep into. Corey Perry has been placed on waivers for the purpose of terminating his contract in Chicago, leaving both of the veteran signings that Chicago made to help Connor Bedard out for the season. Perry clearly had some sort of incident. There is no news as to what, and we won't speculate. And Taylor Hall is hurt and out for the season. So we have a bunch of spots in the Chicago lineup right now. The first line today was Philip Kurashev, Lucas Reichel, and Connor Bedard. I know people preseason were excited about the possibility of Reichel getting some Bedard exposure, and Tyler Johnson took Perry's power play 1 slot. They don't have a power play goal in their last 3 games, so that could change pretty quickly. Additionally, breaking news, Anthony Beauvillier is reported to have been traded to Chicago by Vancouver for a late draft pick. Beauvillier struggled to get his footing this year in Vancouver, but I could see him as like a Taylor Hall replacement, that left wing who's going to shoot more than he's going to pass and try to help out Bedard. I guess that's not exactly Hall's style of play, but, up there on the first line and trying to get some points.
Yeah, just having any level of skill will help Bedard, because even if he's not on the same line, they just have to have some sort of semblance of like other offensive power, or you're just going to have that situation where they could just prep up and have Bedard just like focused on. So even if he's not on the same line, I see this as a potential addition for Bedard. And in the end, it's going to be interesting to see if Kurashev keeps it up, because I think it's going to be right now, other than maybe your Seth Jones in a bagger league, there's not much real interest in this team as a whole from a fantasy perspective.
Totally. I think Kurashev has some potential, but I'm not really going to be jumping to add anybody else because of their deployment in Chicago, mostly because of the Chicago aspect of that. Moving right along, and back to Detroit actually, Dylan Larkin is now injured and going to miss Wednesday's game and likely Thursday also. They're hoping to get him back in on Saturday, but JT Compher is the beneficiary, having taken over the line 1 power play 1 slot. Look for some points there. He's actually been pretty good this year, borderline ownable in leagues. Shams, do you have any other concerns with Larkin being out?
I think it's in a position now that maybe in past years, this would have been one of those things where the whole team would sink. Now, obviously, he is the best player in general. And the fact that, I have to say in general now with the DeBrincat just shows that how much better the team is as well. So I think really just the thing to keep in mind is that depending on your league, Compher has been great for just seemingly getting points every game, but he doesn't shoot, he doesn't hit, he doesn't block. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if he doesn't get a point, it could be basically a 0 for you in that game.
Totally, but hopefully with the good deployment, he will be getting points. Next up, we're going into some outjuries. Shams, why don't you tell us who's back in the lineup in Pittsburgh?
And Bryan Rust is back on the top line, top power play, back in his usual spot in Pittsburgh. Raquel is still yet to be seen on what's going on with him, but it's nice to have some extra strength, because right now they're down 2-1 to Nashville. So basically, I think this is just going to be one of those situations that you just plug him back in, and hopefully that Gensel and that top line and top power play just get that boost of just having more skill, and no shade, or maybe just a little bit shade to the Drew O'Connors and the other random people that were being randomly added in his place.
Yeah, Rust is totally worth an ad. When he's out there, I think he's probably owned in most of your leagues. He actually has been playing very well this year, and you always want the top line, top power play guys in Pittsburgh. A lesser owned outjury, call me crazy, but I kind of have interest in Rasmus Ristolainen, especially in leagues that well, only in leagues that count hits and blocks. His first game back, he had 3 shots, 3 hits, and 2 blocks. In previous seasons, he's had between 4 and 6 hits plus blocks per game, which can add a lot of value. This is also the best team, possibly, that Ristolainen's been on. He's actually never played a playoff game because he's been in Buffalo and then Philadelphia. If he can get in on, a couple more points and be a 30-point defenseman instead of a 20-point defenseman, that could be enough to tip him over the edge, because even in previous season, he's kind of been like the top tier of streamer defensemen that always gets added for a 4-game week, but gets dropped immediately afterwards. It's just a little bit of value could end up pushing him over the edge. Unfortunately, I don't think he's in line for the power play deployment he was seen in preseason, thanks to the emergence of Travis Sanheim and Sean Walker. They've both been really good, and I don't see why he'd get power play deployment over them.
Will be an interesting thing to see is that, because I was kind of tempted by Ristolainen as well. There was just a slight hesitation with me because you said, and this is the part that kind of interests me, is the team is better. And the thing is that, I'm kind of hesitant just to see how much time he gets down the road, because they actually have other defensive players that are actually half decent. And also, if the team is overall better, maybe they're going to be caved in less. And then what you like about having those bagger D on the bad teams is if their D is always defending against shots and whatnot, they don't have the puck, so they're getting a lot of the hits and the blocks. So depends on to see how the team is, and then kind of keep an eye on if this was a peak or if this is actually a sign of things to come.
You're absolutely right there that the value in hits and blocks comes when a team does not have the puck. So if your team is really good and has the puck, you'll be scoring more goals, hopefully, but you'll have less opportunities for hits and blocks. The one thing that does help Ristolainen is he's playing a ton of shorthanded time, which will lead to a lot of blocked opportunities. Although he's been whiffing quite a bit tonight, I'm convinced that the scorekeeper in the Carolina-Philly game doesn't know what a hit or a block is, but I'm also not watching the game, so maybe that's just how it's playing. Last but not least, before we go to our ad break, let's head over to the desert. Vegas has shuffled their lines, and it didn't help because they lost 2-1 last night. But Shams, you uncovered something interesting about how bad Vegas's offense has been in the past couple weeks, actually.
Yeah, it's actually been really surprising, because I think most of us have been thinking about how they started off this year. They were scorching hot. So the interesting thing is that the last 10 games, they have only 3 wins with 5 losses and 2 overtime losses. And in those 10 games, they scored only 20 goals, which is okay. You'd be like, okay, 2 goals a game. But out of those 10 games, they actually had a 5-0 win against the Sharks and a 6-5 win against the Habs, which are 2 of those 3 wins. So that is over half of their goals in 2 games against lesser opponents. So I think this is a sign that they had to try something else. The interesting thing is that the lines did stay the same today. The game's just started, so we don't know how it's going to end up. You'll see it in the score sheet tomorrow. But right now, with only that 1 goal, you thought that maybe they'd swing it again, but they're sticking with it and seeing what's going to happen next.
There definitely are better days ahead for some of the fantasy producers in Vegas. I mean, they're arguably the top team in the league defending the Stanley Cup. If not, they're at least a top 5 team. This terrible scoring is not going to last forever. Ironically, I was just looking at the stats. I think I know why I didn't realize this. The Golden Knight I have the most exposure to is Jack Eichel, and he has points on 8 of those 20 goals in their last 10 games. So he's doing great. But your Jonathan Marchessaults, your Mark Stone, Chandler Stevenson, William Karlsson, who, by the way, we told you was not sustainable, Alex Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore, those guys are going to get a bit better, and I'm just waiting for the breakout game. Maybe it's tonight against Edmonton, because Edmonton gives up a lot of goals. The other Vegas Golden Knight who has been really, really good for fantasy and may get better is Adin Hill. Adin Hill's got, I think, a 930-something save percentage, and Logan Thompson, who's been alternating starts with him, has faltered recently. all of a sudden, if Adin Hill gets a 60 to 75% share of the workload, he could be a top 5 goalie in fantasy. I was never a believer in Adin Hill when he was on Arizona and San Jose for a bit, but everything I've seen shows me that his playstyle fits what Vegas is doing. He's going to be an elite option behind them, and I'm kind of hoping that he just runs with it and we get to see kind of a breakout of a young goalie.
So in this situation, it's kind of interesting is that while Thompson has stumbled, he hasn't been too bad if you take his whole season into account. But this is going to be one of those situations where it's really just dependent on how the coach sees it and how the coach feels, because as we've seen a lot of times, they're trying to apply logic and whatnot. It's not going to be a place where you go with goalie starts. So since he has been getting some of the starts now, it's something to keep an eye on Hill. And even though they haven't been scoring a lot, the Golden Knights do have just an overall good defensive structure and haven't been letting in a lot of goals in general. A lot of these losses are like 2-1, 1-0, those kind of things. So if Hill can get a lot of starts, even if the goal scoring doesn't come into play, those rate stats are going to look really good. So it's going to be something to keep in mind. There's a hint of it, but if it continues, I'm with you on the fact that this could be a nice find.
Part of me wonders if some of those goalie start decisions actually come down to behind closed doors practice type things where, there's probably a practice and a morning skate, maybe 2 practices between every game, and the coach is paying attention to who's locked in and who's isn't. So I would definitely pay attention if Hill is on your wire for some reason. I know Thompson's been dropped in a number of my leagues already. I have not seen Hill dropped, even though at times when they were alternating, I was tempted to. I'm not tempted to anymore, though. The last team that is also kind of breaking their goalie rotation, I believe for the first time this year, Arizona, Connor Ingram started 2 games in a row and is playing really well against Tampa right now, coming off of a really good start last time, and Karel Vejmelka has been beyond terrible. This isn't like Vegas where both of them have good numbers. This is a 920 versus an 892 save percentage, and Ingram may just be running with this job. I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that he was a highly touted prospect, kind of that new wave of American goalies with John Gibson and Jack Campbell back in the day. And we've had mixed results with those other two, but Ingram's only 26 or 27 right now. This could be, him finding his stride in the NHL and having worked through some issues both on and off the ice earlier in his career. I'm definitely interested in Ingram if he's still sitting on wires, which I think he will be in a lot of places, because a 50-50 in Arizona isn't as interesting.
Yeah, 100% with you there. And the nice thing is with Ingram is that he was getting that 50-50 split or a little bit more playing time late last season. So they already had kind of whet their appetite there. And it continued into this season to show that this was something that kind of spanned over an off season to show that they had interest in him. And then as well of just as you mentioned before, this situation with a clear delineation of stats makes me feel that as long as he keeps it up, that he could own the net. And depending on where you are, I have him in a league where I picked him up just as a streamer kind of situation because you could kind of bet on when his starts are. So he might be kind of captured in some leagues there, but if he's a free agent, honestly, depending on how scarce your goalies are, I'd be tempted to pick him up even without a game. Say, if you're hearing this on Tuesday night and that game goes well, I would be tempted to burn a pickup, especially on those, leagues where goalies are scarce and you're trying to think of which random backup you're going to play for 2 weeks.
I actually did that last night because it was yesterday on Monday is when they announced that he'd be getting the game. I burnt a move on him, even though I already had 2 goalies that were probably going to start on Tuesday. And I just felt that it was a long-term ad that could potentially help my team down the road. With that, let's head into our ad break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We took quite a while on the news today, so we're just going to go into a couple of recent hot-cold streaks, continuing the trend from before the break of goalies, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen on Buffalo is quite hot right now. Shams, why don't you give us the details?
Yeah, it's basically, he is the front runner. We were talking past about a three-headed monster where none of them were going to be useful, but if you look at the season, is that UPL has 6 of the 10 wins and clearly is better in both goals against average and in save percentage. And the coach said that he's going to get more starts, and he showed it by actually putting Devon Levi back to Rochester. Since he is a rookie, they can not have to worry about waivers. So now it's just him and Comrie, and UPL clearly surpasses him in every stat. So the way that I would see is that most likely, at the very least in the short term, you should get 2 more games this week. And the only reason he's only going to get 2 is one of them is a back-to-back. So on that Saturday, Sunday, Comrie will get one of them. But if he keeps this up, Buffalo is kind of not doing so well on the wins and losses right now, and they're seeing themselves as an up-and-coming team. I don't think they're going to be playing around with goalies. If they have one that's hot, they're going to be grabbing onto them and trying to hope that they save the season, and UPL is looking like to be that goalie right now.
Definitely does. I agree with you that the coach coming out in support of UPL and the management sending Levi down, although I think that's just to get Levi a few games because Eric Comrie has been by far the worst of the 3. I would assume that Levi may come back up next time they need to start from their backup goalie, and Comrie is just the odd man out. Big opportunity here, another goalie you could be picking up. Finally, let's just finish up the goalies. We got one more goalie on the list. Who else do we have here, Shams?
This is a hometown favorite for myself. If you're a fan of half-decent goalies, maybe bad goalies on bad teams, we got one for you. That's Blackwood on Sharks. Somehow just like playing 3 of the last 5 games, 3 quality starts. I know the stat says quality starts. I would say they were beautiful starts because they were basically just getting hemmed in and he's keeping them alive. So this is one of those situations where if you like flipping coins or play blackjack and you just want to see of win big or win or lose big, Blackwood is your kind of guy. And depending on how you play, I know people are afraid of those losses, but if you just average out the points, even with the negative games, I guarantee you that take a look at your points league situations. He's probably doing better than your generic like Thompson that gets like a little bit of a save, maybe a win every 3rd game. This is a guy that even though the team is bad, I'm not trying to sell you high on the team, he's going to get so many shots that over time, and you have to eat that pill, over time, he is a rosterable goalie.
I agree with you. You and I both have similar goalie strategies where I will happily take a goalie who eats 45 shots and gives up 5 or 6 goals because the downside is, yeah, he gives up 5 or 6 goals but still has a decent save percentage. The upside is he has the game of his life and has a, 51 save, 1 goal against, 2-1 win like Blackwood had earlier this year against Colorado. Or even if the Sharks manage to start scoring and win a game 6-5, you've got a bit more upside with the wins there if your goalie's facing 40 shots. That's kind of when my issue with Grubauer all season, where Seattle suppresses shots and Carolina's another team that does, where their goalies are only facing 25 shots a game. If they lose a game 3-2, that's actually a really bad fantasy start, even though you'll take a goalie who plays a 3-2 game most of the time in real life. A skater hot streak for you. The guy they know as Nuke, Valeri Nichushkin, has gone absolutely nuclear since the injury to Arturi Lehkonen. Makes you wonder why they didn't have him first power play to begin with. Maybe they were trying to spread the offense a bit. But he's got 12 points in the last 8 games played, a lot of them on the power play. I don't know what the exact cupful points per game are on that, but he's been one of my favorite owns in a couple leagues recently. Do you think he keeps this spot for the rest of the season now that they've seen what he can do?
This is going to be that song and dance of hopefully, if they keep on winning and this keeps on going. But as I mentioned before, it's going to be one of those situations where you have to guess what a coach is thinking, and I'm not going to play that game because I always get it wrong. So I think it's one of those situations where he's a great player. We always knew that. People were even drafting him, seeing him on the second line, because at the start of the season, it was like Drouin and like top wide with Rantanen and McKinnon. That I would say is that the highest you're tasting it right now. And even if he gets put on the second line, I could see him maybe keeping the top power play, because I think it was like Lehkonen had it, that there's no excuse to keep him off the top power play. So even when Lehkonen returns, it could be a switch of the even strike stuff, but I feel like he's making a strong case that he should and hopefully will keep the top power play even if the team gets fully healthy.
Colorado has also done some of the splitting McKinnon and Rantanen to kind of give two duos instead of one elite trio and leaving the last guy on his own. The big problem, like you mentioned, with the power play is that Nichushkin and Lehkonen do so many of the same things in the net fronts and the corner that it's kind of silly to have both of them on the ice at the same time in a power play, and putting both of them on the first power play would require removing Ryan Johansson, who's very helpful in the face-off dot. It gives you both a second center and a very good one at that on your power play, where face-offs can be quite important. We've got a cold streak in honor of our other host, Lewis, who brought him up in our chat yesterday and today. Shams, who are we talking about?
We're talking about Ryan Hartman, who was the darling of maybe, say, a season or two, where he was getting to play the center line with both Zuccarello and Kaprizov, but with both of them not doing so much, Hartman is alongside with them, doing nothing himself with 0 points in the last 5 games, and he's not going to get any points anytime soon because he's in the process of serving a 2-game suspension, the first game today. And the interesting thing is going to keep in mind is that the team is playing with a new coach, and even with that is that we can't really be depending on the past to see how he plays. So it's going to be interesting to see is that once he's in a position to play, how he's being put back into the lineup once with being the support of a new coach.
He definitely hasn't been getting the prime deployment that he did in his really good year that he had. I think Marco Rossi's emergence as what looks like a pretty solid NHLer this year has completely ruined any chance Hartman has of playing in the top 6 when he is not suspended, and I don't have any interest in him on a third line. With that, thanks for joining us. Be sure to give us a follow at ShortShiftsKK, as well as Bryan and Elon at Keepin' Karlsson. Please use www.gamedaytweets.com to get all the best info from Twitter without having to slog through the rest of that place. It includes team by team and searchable tweets by player name. Visit that site and other great sites we use to research our episodes with at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, ShiftChart.com, Icy Data, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach, and John Reed is our digital media producer. Until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.